All right, today we're going to be looking at a broad overlook of geography and human geography. My essential question for today is, why is Lubbock arranged the way that it is? We might not have that answered by the end of this lesson, but we will by the next class period. First thing I want to look at is kind of the importance of geography. Geography provides us real opportunities to look at the local, national, and global environment, as well as the physical earth of those areas, and it allows us to make an impact on all three aspects of that. It also gives us a better understanding and a way to promote multiculturalism, international global communication, which are things that we are pushing towards more in today's world. All right, I've got a few statistics here. These are not important for you to understand the exact statistics, but it gives you a good idea and a good snapshot of why we actually need to be looking at geography. Number one, 75% of Americans in the world, or 75% of people in the world, can't label their own country on a map. That's pretty sad. Okay, and that's not just talking about Americans, but my next two statistics are. The next one says that China has the highest population in the world. The reason I put this in here is most Americans don't believe that China has the highest population in the world. Most Americans feel like the United States has the highest population in the world, which is incorrect. Next one, 75% of people in the United States feel like English is the most commonly spoken language in the world, when in reality, Mandarin Chinese is the most commonly spoken language in the world. Okay, so some misconceptions here that we're dealing with that I kind of want to address as we begin this. Now, what I'm going to look at now, I've got a few famous geographers wrote down, and I know it's small and it's crunched here, but I'll explain it as we go along, and we're going to go into much more detail in this later. Number one of the first people that I put down was Eratosthenes. Okay, what Eratosthenes did is he was one of the very first people to calculate the circumference of the earth. He was not the first person to identify that the earth was actually round and spherical. That was Aristotle, even though everybody thought he was crazy, that the earth couldn't be round. Aristotle was the first. Eratosthenes was the first to calculate the circumference of the earth. Ptolemy, which you can see is spelled Ptolemy, Ptolemy was the first person to discover latitude and longitudinal lines, which that helped with the creation of maps. Idrisi, which is an Arabic geographer, he was one of the very first people to set out on an accurate representation of the earth on a map. Okay, that's what he's important for. And then we've got George Marsh. George Marsh is known as one of the first modern environmentalists. He's one of the first people to look at human environment with the human interaction with the environment, and he was one of those that first identified that to the realm of geography. And then we've got Carl Saar. Carl Saar was a famous geographer who felt like we really needed to focus on the human environment interaction in geography more than we do just earth movement. Okay, and that's why in the modern education system, earth science deals more with the actual movement of the earth, and then geography deals with more of the connections with peoples. Now the models, most famous geographers came up with models, which are just accurate representations of geographic data, and we're going to get into more specific models later. Next thing that we're going to look at is location and place. Location is looking at the position of the map that you're at, and place is on that position what's going on. Okay, there's 5 ways to look at location. First is the place name. This is also known as toponym, and the art of creating names is called toponymity. Okay, kind of a fun word to throw around there. But the place name, that's most of the time what we refer to when looking at places, like its city name, like Lubbock, Texas. The next thing is the site. The easiest way to think about this and remember this is like the word site. Okay, visually what you see going around. Is there a bunch of trees? Is it flat, like Lubbock and level land? Okay, but that's the site. The situation is that its actual position among other things. Okay, its situation of where it is, where it's situated. Okay, that's kind of the easiest way of referring to it. The next two, you probably remember this from your world geography class. There's absolute location and then relative location. Remember, absolute location is the exact position of that on the map. Okay, like latitude and longitudinal coordinates. All right, the exact position. Relative location is in relation to other places and other things, which goes back a lot to kind of the site and the situation of that place in that location. Okay, for example, a relative location would be like next to Allsup's past Sonic, instead of 23 degrees north, 65 degrees east, which would be an absolute location. Okay, the next thing that we've got is space. All right, how are things distributed? That's what we're looking at. Distribution is the same thing as dispersion. Some books use the word dispersion, some books use the word distribution. The College Board recognizes both of them, so it's important that we understand if it's talking about distribution or dispersion, it's the same thing. It's looking at how people and settlements are scattered throughout an area, throughout a space. Okay, there's two different types of dispersion or distribution. First is clustered, also known as agglomeration. That means it's together. It's clustered together. Okay, it's dense. It's together. They're packed together. Dispersed or scattered means just that. The population is scattered. All right. So if you're looking at a city in Japan, you're going to have clustered or agglomerated because they really value the amount of space. But if you're looking at like maybe even the rural areas of cities in the United States, it's scattered. Okay, people have a lot more land. The key concept that we're looking at is scale. This is a very, very, very important concept that we're going to be repeating all throughout the year. So it's very important that you understand what scale is. What scale is it's looking at the ratio between linear distance on a map and linear distance on Earth's surface. To put that in common terms, it's saying we're taking something that is round like the Earth and we're transferring that to something that's flat like a map. And how are we doing that? Because obviously our map can't be the same size as the city of Lubbock. Okay, it's got to be smaller. So the amount that it's smaller is its scale. It's that map scale, and each map has a different scale. Some maps can have a small scale, which means that it's a really large number. Okay, some maps can have a large scale, which means that it is a small number. Okay, they can be put together in ratios or in fractions. A ratio is like this one right here. It's 1 to 100,000. And then we can have it in fractions from like 1/100. All right? Again, small number, big number, large scale, small scale. And when I mean small scale, I mean you're taking that huge map and you're going down really, really small. It's like having the map of the Earth on a sheet of paper. And when I'm looking at large scale, it's like taking a city and putting it on a map. It's not as small as the whole Earth. So it's going to have a small number because you're looking at a smaller space on that Earth. The next key concept that we're looking at is pattern. Okay, the pattern that this is arranged on the scale of a map. That's what we're looking at here. What pattern means is it is a geographic arrangement of objects in space. Okay, it's how are we. Major key concept is pattern. All right, it's a geometric arrangement of objects in space. Basically, it's how are we arranging our cities? How are we arranging our things on a map? All right, there's a couple of different patterns of geometric distribution. The first is linear distribution. When you think of linear distribution, think of lines. All right, think of like houses on a street like we have in Lubbock, Texas. You've got the streets and then you've got houses that are on that street. And this may seem like a normal distribution to you, but I promise you there's places in the world that do not have a linear distribution. Okay, but again, like a line, houses are arranged on that line and the pattern looks something like this depending on the streets. All right, now the streets may kind of curve, have cul-de-sacs, but the houses are still arranged pretty much linearly. Okay, the next type of pattern, which is continued here, is a centralized pattern. We don't have a lot of centralized patterns in the United States, but I guess you could look at the end of the cul-de-sac and see a centralized pattern. It's when objects circle one another, all right? Like in a circle, okay? You've got the center of the circle, and then you've got the outside. The best example of it in the world that we will see is like an Islamic city. In an Islamic city, you've got the mosque in the middle of the town center, and then you've got the streets and the houses arranged around that. Okay? It's arranged in circles. It's arranged around that center point, around that centralized pattern of the development of that city. Okay? And then the last one is random. And you'll see I don't have a lot of examples because it's random. All right? The arrangement is not centralized. It's not linear. It's just, here it is. Okay? Concept that we're looking at today is regionalization. Now I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we are going to cover regionalization again in the next unit when we actually talk about the different types of regions. But I want to go ahead and give you a heads up on it. All right? Regionalization means the classification of individual places or areal units. Now you may be like me and wondering, what does the word areal mean? All right? Areal is another word for region. And the reason they didn't put regional units here is because that wouldn't make sense when you're talking about regionalization because you're using the same root word. But that's what that means. A regional unit, area, and space. Okay, there's three different sections of regionalization that we're going to cover today. First is regionalism. Okay, this is talking about like coexisting with one another. When there's a bunch of different religions, for example, in one area and they're living together, that's regionalism. Okay, they're still together in a region, but they've got specific aspects that are individual to them. Next is sectionalism. Whenever one of those religions becomes very strong and adamant in their worship, and then that unites everybody from that one area, that's sectionalism. All right. A good example to look back in history of this is the American Civil War. Sectionalism existed with the North and with the South. All right. Even though they were in one region of the United States, sectionalism developed and it split them. All right. And then the last one that I'm going to introduce today, and then we'll cover more later, is Irredentism. What Irredentism is another historical look. It's looking at even though one country's physical borders may be here, but one of their ethnic groups is out here, Irredentism is saying that this government has the right to go out and get this area. Okay? A good example is Russia and Ukraine right now. Okay? Ukraine in the area over here, Russian government is saying that there's ethnic Russians here and that it's actually their land even though it's outside of their formal boundaries, so they feel like it's part of them.